Good afternoon, everyone. Hello. I'm Matt Cooke from the Google News Lab. Nice to see some familiar faces in the audience. If you have any questions we can't get to today, I promise I'll come back to you with a more clever answer than I'll be able to deliver today. If you have any feedback, then you know the hashtag. It's hashtag NISLON. We've got about an hour, as was said, and we're going to run through some different areas. Some people call it immersive storytelling. Other people call it digital storytelling. I just call it tips. We're going to start with Google Trends. Then we're going to look at 360-degree stills and videos, and then take a quick look into VR. For me, I've been a journalist for about 8 years before I joined Google. VR is a really interesting area that many journalists, when I talk about, look at me like I'm a complete moron. VR is not for journalism. VR is for astronauts and space experiences. Wrong. This year is where we're seeing lots of newsrooms, thankfully lots in Europe, playing a real role in experimenting with 360 technology and VR in a way that doesn't just use technology because it's there, but uses it to help them tell a different story or get at a story with a different angle. So let's get cracking. For those of you who are here this morning, apologies for slight repetition. This is the News Lab, the team I'm on. We think about ourselves in three ways. Tools, which is essentially training. Data, where we're looking at trends, and we'll touch on that in a moment. And programs. So some of the big issues that newsrooms around the world are dealing with. Social media verification, mobile video, things like that. We know that journalists around the world use our tools already, and until about last June, if you were a journalist and you tried to use any of our tools and you ran into a problem, we'd send you off to go and find the information in a lovely written essay. We've changed that, and so now there's a much more useful website, g.co/newslab, where you'll find 45 or so lessons. They'll go through bullet points on how to do something to best practice. So I really recommend taking a look at that. For example, you'll go onto that website, and let's say, in this case, you're using YouTube, but it might be Google Maps, it might be search. Here now is a 5-minute lesson on how to do something to best practice, with literally bullet point information showing you how to do one thing. Let's say you're a journalist who needs a map, you don't know how to embed something, you don't know how to use HTML code. This is now a place to go and get really practical information. Okay. Google Trends. Since 2007, there's been a website here in the UK, google.co.uk/trends, that has anonymized aggregate data on what people are searching for. It's a tool that, when used responsibly, can help journalists to think about researching and reporting your stories. And from 1998 to where we are now, when Google launched, of course, there are many more data sets available. This is Google data alone. 3 billion searches a day, that's 1 trillion a year. But data-driven journalism is nothing new. In fact, this is a graph, I think, from the 1900s in Italy. It's a piece of journalism that uses data at its heart, but without the narrative, without the journalism around it, it is just a graph. And all the examples I'm talking about over the next couple of minutes absolutely need your explanation, analysis, and interpretation to tell the story. But there is now a tool that's been improved and can be helpful. So this is the Google Trends tool, which I'll show you how to use in a moment. Who here has used this tool before? Okay, a small number. You'll go onto this website and you'll put a term in, and it will show you search interest over time. In this case, we're looking at Sepp Blatter. You may have heard of this person. Search interest over time, but notice that big white space on the right-hand side. That's because all the data that was available until June last year was 36 hours old. So if you were a reporter covering the Super Tuesday elections in America, you'd have to wait until Super Thursday or Friday to see if the results of the election had led to people going online to look for more information or to find some more facts. So we changed that, and now the data is almost real time. So if I'm watching the 10 o'clock news, by about 10:05, I can go onto this tool and put in a phrase that appeared in the first package or the theme, and you'll see search interest has changed. Let's go to the tool, and hopefully the Wi-Fi will stick with us. Google Trends UK, so google.co.uk/trends, hurrah. There we go. So we're seeing here a 250 list of trending stories. Think about that in the same way you'd look at Twitter, what's on the hashtag. The UK, Ireland and Australia are the only countries in the world where football and sport always dominates. Let's say you're not that as interested in football though. Go up here to the top and click on all categories. And you'll see there, this is actually in Dutch for some unusual reason. But I think entertainment could be easy one for us to work out what that is. That would be the entertainment stories right now in the UK. On there also you've got health, business, science. Just a way of seeing what are the trending stories coming out right now. Quite a good snapshot. More useful though, the icon on the top left, click on that. And let's go for, this is going to be challenging my Dutch, which is non-existent. Think that means explore. Dun, dun, dun. Yes, thankfully. And we're going through to the bit of the tool now which we saw earlier. This is the set blatter bit we looked at, okay? So, I'm going to put a word in here which rocked my mum's world last year, plastic bags. I'm doing an environmental story, and I want to see if the changes in legislation, where we all had to pay 5 pence for a bag, led to people going online to look for more information. I've typed the word in. Always click on the word that it recognises, because that captures misspellings and abbreviations, in this case, plastic bags. And now when it visualises, we're seeing search interest in that term. Let's change the top icon. So this is Dutch for worldwide. Let's go and I think that would be the UK. You can get UK data down to England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland level at the moment, which is not great, and we're seeing if we can get that down to city level. But let's just look at UK for now. And there you'll see when it comes up, there you go, 2 significant spikes. The first spike on the left, when Scotland introduced the legislation. And then the spike further along is when England caught up some years later. If you are the Guardian newspaper and you want this graph to complement your article, go down here to this icon here, the back and forth arrow, the embed code, and it comes up with the code that you can use there. If you're the BBC and you don't embed, they screen grab this and treat it as a JPEG. If you're Time magazine and you think this looks ugly, you're allowed to think that. Go up here to the top right, click on those 3 dots, and you've got the option to download it as a CSV. So you can give this to someone in your own newsroom or your own team to turn into a graph that looks more similar to your kind of content. And by the way, this is not about putting a big Google stamp on your article. You can just source Google in the way you'd source any data set or quote in a normal way. Let's say you're a journalist who you know where your stories come from. Let's say you're a business reporter, you're a football reporter, or in this case you are a royal correspondent. We're in London. I am going to look for the royal family because I know that every week I know I need to do a story about them. Prince William. Well, let's do Prince Charles. Let's not compare them to a plastic bag. It's treason. And at the top, I'm going to change the date. So rather than 2004, when all the data comes from, I just want the last 12 months, or maybe the last day or 7 days, okay? And then it will show you search interest over time. So for me, this is fairly interesting. I can pick out why there might be spikes. But right now, it's not relevant. But I want a reminder. Maybe once a week, maybe once a month. To do that, go to the top and click on this plus symbol, and you get a way to get a subscription sent to you. So how are journalists and newsrooms using this tool already? Well, some of you might be familiar with this graph. This is one I built ahead of the UK general election last year. At the top there, we're looking at the political leaders in the United Kingdom over the 30-day period. This is before the election itself. So any guesses as to why there might be two noticeable spikes? Why might people suddenly go onto search engines? And by the way, this now looks at YouTube, Google News, and Google Search. Why would they be going on to look for more information at one particular point? TV debates. So in a country like the UK, people are watching TV and then they're going onto their mobile first. So you can do this yourself. What we did as a pilot is provide the top 10 questions people were searching for during the UK election. These are the top 10 questions people were searching for during the ITV News Debate. You'll find your favourites in there. Some of it relates to human nature. You're watching TV and people are stood next to each other maybe. You're hearing a different accent. I think some of it is driven by discussion on social media. I think though, question 4, what is a referendum? Question 9, what is austerity? For me, the most important questions on there. 3 weeks before the general election. So we shared these questions with publishers. This is The Guardian. They took them, with one line answered what austerity meant, and then of course wrote a qualified piece about why austerity is a big issue in the debate. Showed you this earlier, but this is the EU referendum so far. Before the debate and before the campaign officially begun, already the #1 question in the UK referring to the EU referendum was, what does the word Brexit mean? A word that's already being used in TV and radio cues and headlines, in political speeches, in tweets. We've seen the what is Brexit question dip to #2, and the #1 is who can vote, or how can I vote? This is interesting. The blue search line shows you interest in the Leave EU campaign. It is not showing you a poll, and it is not showing you, though, search sentiment. It's not saying more people will leave than stay. It's just saying there's more interest in the blue line than in the red line.
Have you drawn any conclusions? I mean, does that relate to the syntax of the searches, that it's showing that people understand the problem in those terms?
So it's literally just showing search interest in that topic. No sentiment, no kind of add-on in terms of what are they searching for next, what's interpretation. It's just purely one level of just search interest.
It does seem to indicate how the problem has been defined to people so that they will look for something in particular.
Perhaps. And there have been other people who will look at it in a different way. So, for example, this is a map that we created with BuzzFeed and an independent academic ahead of the general election that looks at search interest in the political leaders, the different constituencies across the UK. One publisher said, this is a poll. This is what's going to happen. I think you just need to take one look at Scotland and you can maybe qualify that it isn't. You can read a sort of suggestion into it, but I think also you need on top of it your own journalism to say, what is this giving us a cue into? And in some cases it's not very clear. Okay, this is Time magazine using the tool to pick out search interest in Vladimir Putin. Just search interest in this term. Then downloading it as a CSV, they've then turned it into a graph and added their own editorial on top of it to try and give some more context in there. Why might there be a significant spike around this period of time, around this issue? Other organisations, particularly around elections, are looking at this as well. Politiken in Denmark. And this is an example I'm going to try and show you from BBC News, looking to the US presidential debate. Let's copy that. So, when you look at the top 10 questions people are searching for around, let's say, the presidential Republican candidates, what can you as journalists and content creators do with that? How can you take it from being just a graph or a line of questions into something more interesting or something that you can do more with? This is a video that is not made for TV, and it won't be to everyone's taste, but for me it gives a different angle.
Their names aren't just a coincidence. They're brothers. Deb's the younger, he's 62. No, he's actually American, although he was born in Canada. He's 5'7", same height as Zac Efron.
And I think we'll leave it there at a gratuitous shot of Zac Efron. You get the idea. It won't be to everyone's taste, but in a story that we've got until at least November, the BBC have got diverse enough audiences and interests to meet their different audiences in different ways. So for me, it's a good example. Let's look at a couple of other examples using trends data. Start on the left. From my point of view, using trends, maps, or any form of new or less familiar digital storytelling device always works best when you've done this story before, or it's a story where, frankly, you can write the headline already. I was in Ireland a few months ago, and they have a big rural country fair there every year. Huge number of people go, and a journalist said, I can kind of write the story. Thousands of people attend, da-da-da-da-da. This is the UK budget. So once you get past the idea of going to a pub and filming the reporter with a pint of, ale or whatever, or thinking about writing a piece in a certain way that you've maybe thought of before, this time we're looking at Google Trends search interest in the different subjects that are being discussed ahead of the UK budget. It's visualised differently across the UK. I don't speak Polish, but I'm told that is a fascinating story about Polish football. Search interest in players. That is something that journalists can do on their own, going onto the tool and downloading information. BBC News are using the Google Trends tool in a number of different ways. This time, when the Pope landed in Washington, DC, of course they'll have their considered TV, radio and written pieces, but also there's room for another angle. They did a social piece thinking about how are people in the US and Washington specifically sharing and discussing his arrival. So they went onto the tool and they looked for the word Fiat. Because when the Pope landed in Washington, DC, he didn't get into a limousine, he got into a Fiat. The joke from their point of view was people were less sure what a Fiat was. It's not going to change the world, but it's going to give a different angle. This is an interesting one, specific to the Sun newspaper here in the UK. If you were to say, where is search interest in one thing the highest? It would always in the UK be in London, of course, for population reasons. If you compare places at the same level and you say we're going to aggregate all the data and anonymise it, and you can look more interestingly at, say, a place in Essex. This is where search interest by comparison is highest in a certain issue. In this case, the England football team. There's some natural images of people celebrating, maybe slightly posed images of people celebrating in Essex. All the big stories, Eurovision. I can see we have some fans in the audience. No? One at the back, thank you. This is one of the stories that journalists would have done already once or twice. Drag out the cliches archive, or think about doing it on a map. This is search interest in the songs around Europe. This is most search, and by no shock, each country tends to be searching most for their own song. What about, though, their second choice? This is an interesting one as well. So on the day that Greece was voting in a referendum that for many was their role in the EU and the Euro, we looked at search interest around the world and visualised it. You can see search interest in Europe spiking significantly, as you might expect. This goes back to the point about journalism and your own analysis, though, because for me, there's another really interesting angle we could take. For example, why is it that down here in Victoria in Australia, there's significant search interest? The trends, the data don't tell you the reason, but your own research is given a bit of a cue. Apparently Melbourne is the second biggest Greek city in the world. So if you are a Sydney-based journalist, you've got a reason now to localise this global story. Or if you're a journalist here in London, you've got an excuse to ask your editor for a news gathering trip down under. Good luck with that one. What about if you compare two stories? If you compare the Greek story, the Greek economic story, on the day there was a story bubbling up from the Chinese stock market, and compared relative interest in both stories, then visualised it. Blue signifies Greece, red China. For me, there are a number of different stories that I could pick out as a journalist from this visualisation. Hinted at this earlier. Of course, the US election is where we're going to see lots of data visualizations, lots of different storytelling techniques. This shows you search interest, not search sentiment, in the Republican presidential candidates, way back when there were a few more of them. Red is Donald Trump. Apart from that, though, I think there's an interesting story. What's going on up by the lakes? What is happening in the story that is affecting search in a different way? Why is it that people are searching in a different way as opposed to the rest of the country? I've had a couple of different examples why that might be. One including the candidate Walker being from there or representing that. Another example might be to do with the water contamination story. I still don't know, but for me, if I were a journalist, that gives me a cue to go and find out. Once you've got the data, yes, you can turn it into a map or a line graph. How about visualizing it? So in this case, we're seeing the Democratic debate over a 2-hour time frame from 9 to 11. And these are the 14 issues that bubbled up in conversation or came through in the questions. When you get those 14 issues and compare search interest across the US during the period of this debate, you can maybe see some interesting patterns. For example, why was it that an issue that started down here quite low, suddenly around about 10 o'clock became the number one issue? It's a different way to analyse the debate and add a different layer. Also, it's a different way to get nuggets of information. Looking at the tool I've shown you how to use, if you were to put two features in this case, it's when Sarah Palin endorsed Donald Trump. It's not going to give me a new story, but it's going to give me a nugget of information that on the day that Sarah Palin endorsed someone, more people were searching for information about her than the person she was endorsing. This is just a brief overview on trends. There's much more on this, depending on your level of interest and experience. For example, googletrends.github.io/data, or just search for the Google Trends data store, is an online library where we've got a whole range of all the different assets, maps, and archives and data sets we've been asked to provide to publishers. Also, every day on twitter.com/GoogleTrends, we put out relevant stories that we're asked by newsrooms to provide data on. For us, there are still caveats to the tool. You still won't get exact numbers. And as I said, here in the UK, the level of granularity is still just at England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales level. But for us, making a leap from 2007 to June last year, we took journalism feedback on board to work with engineers and improve this tool. And for me, the fact that you can now get real-time data makes it much more useful than certainly it was this time last year. Okay, that's Google Trends. Encourage you to take a look and experiment with some of the explore tools yourself. I'll also give you an email at the end with an option for you to find out more. We're going to move on now to a different technique, which is looking at 360-degree stills. There's a big discussion about what VR is. Some people will say that it's basically anything that's not a two-dimensional story, but for some, there's a real nuance, and 360 is not exactly virtual. But this is, for me though, whether it's virtual or not, an immersive technique that uses Google technology in this case, but there'll be others that don't, to get into a story in a different way. We're going to the New York Times website, and we're going to Moore, Oklahoma. When it loads, there we go. Okay. So I think about 4 years ago this photograph was taken. This is the Google Street View image. So at some point the Google Street View car has driven down the street in Moore, Oklahoma, and taken a 360-degree still of the area. At the top is the New York Times image that was taken a couple of days after a cyclone ripped through this town. The reporter at the time was using an expensive camera. They took a 360-degree still and emailed that back to the New York Times. And using the Google Street View tool and the Google Maps API, and a free version of that is available, they were able to sandwich the Street View image and their own together. So while stills and video can convey what happened, this 360 technique allows you to see it on a different level. So now on my phone, I can move around with my finger, or with my mouse, I can take a look around as well. So now we're getting a 360-degree look around Moore, Oklahoma, comparing literally before and after as best the tool allows us to. And you're seeing here a whole community in this case affected by what has happened. So for breaking news stories, where there's a dramatic change, this is a tool that could be done using a developer tool. What happens though if you're someone like me that would not be able to use a developer tool? How can you get into this story in a different way? Well, what about using Street View still, but like this? We are in Manhattan, and we're looking at Freedom Tower being built. You'll see here we're at the same spot on Street View, and by virtue of what's in the top left, we're able to go back at certain data sets and see this image change. This is something that allows users to chart maybe local change and also compare and contrast quite dramatic change. So,
Have you looked at what Bellingcat is doing with their verification of combat in Syria using Google Photos a lot?
that's a great point. Let me just bring this up. So, Eliot Higgins is a guy who is part of Bellingcat. And Bellingcat is one of the organisations, the media startups that have signed up to firstdraftnews.com. I mentioned it very briefly this morning, and if you weren't here, you won't have heard me say that. But this is a startup organisation, so NewsLab is in there, Medan, Dig Deeper, Bellingcat. A really good example of someone who uses a range of digital tools, including Maps and Earth, but also Instagram and a range of different non-Google tools as well, to fact check, right?
Yes.
For example, one story that's, I mean, he probably won't be going to Russia on holiday anytime soon. He's used Instagram selfies taken by Russian soldiers to challenge official notices and points of view from different sources about where certain military personnel are based. If you are fascinated to know more about him, and I would really recommend it, firstdraftnews.com, take a look, and at the bottom you'll see a link down to his website. Let's quickly jump to that. And he's done loads on MH17, Ukraine. He's looking now at Syria as well. if you can find something online of him talking, definitely watch it. He's a really inspiring journalist that has some great examples. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Is that presentation going to be available anywhere to download, or can we send you an email where we have it?
This one, or
No, not that one, like the one that you're presenting.
yeah. So I will make sure there's a version available somewhere. The best place I would point to is g.co/newslab. The presentations we do, I will see if I can tweet some examples out, maybe in a thread after this. We tend not to share the presentations because we change them often. I'll make sure, though, I can do as much as I can on my Twitter handle afterwards to point to where I'm getting these examples from. Okay, let's head back to New York. And we're looking at the Google Historic Street View. In this case, it's not for a developing story, but in this case, it's just a social change story. This is the Wall Street Journal going on to Google Street View to the same street corner in Brooklyn. On the left, we're seeing Brooklyn, August 2007. On the right, we're seeing September 2013. Using the Google Street View tool and no developer tool, they've sandwiched these two images next to each other. The story here is gentrification, or how hipsters have ruined the world for everyone. Because they're saying here, newsagents, florists, cool, local places, gin bar, skinny jeans. It's just a way to, a cue, like trends, giving you a cue to get into the story. In this case, at the top, they're doing 5 different examples. So, how do you do this? Let's go to Google Maps. I'm going to go to Oxford Circus. There we go. And at the bottom right, I'm going to find this yellow icon, which we call the peg man. I'm literally going to drag that into a location, so in this case, Oxford Circus. And we're now in the familiar area where we're looking around and seeing Oxford Circus, where no one's awake, apparently. Keep looking around. At this point, I want to see what data is available, so I'm going to go back to this clock at the top left. Click on this, and we can jump back in time to 2008 in this case. There we go. So, small changes. If you know London, then you'll be familiar with these bendy buses, we called them. They worked in every other city around the world, but we hated them in London, so we got rid of them after about 2 years. Hugely controversial. They had a weird middle bit. Also, they've changed this. It's now a crossing. If you were to look around, you'd see things like the new BBC building. There's a lovely bus. Keep going along. There we go. The new crossing. Flags are up for the Olympic Games. Nighttime. What's this? July 2014. And there, for bus fans, is the new lovely buses, which we don't mind those. They don't have a weird middle bit, so we don't mind those. When I showed this tool in Amsterdam a few months back, the next day a journalist sent me a link. They did this to their entire Dockland area of Amsterdam, screen grabbed an area that has changed dramatically in the last 5 years, and then they, using their own tools, sort of ghost-like, added the two on top of each other. It's showing social change, buildings changing over time. Imagine this in places where there's been significant change. In this city where the Olympics were hosted, East London, in Glasgow where there were the Commonwealth Games, or even just on your local street where there's been a new museum or a new school. Whatever it is your audience care about, maybe this is one way to think about seeing if there's been significant or interesting change.
I'm sorry, can you repeat how you access this historical data?
Yeah, so it's up here in the top left. So if you go onto the public tool, you'll see here, there's a clock. Click on that, and this window comes down. Then you're simply able to click through, and a very simple way of doing it without any developer tool is to literally screen grab it. That's what the Wall Street Journal did. In some cases, you might want to go to the site yourself and take a brand new snap as well, and then contrast that with what is there. For example, this is BBC News covering the London riots some years ago. So the top image is a brand new image from Reuters when a carpet store in North London was torched. This is the Street View version. So straight away they're showing a before and after that's allowing their audience to engage in the story in a sharper way.
Can you animate through the historical data?
It's a good question. So and the question was, can you animate through? This is how they've done it. They've cheated it. So they've kind of turned this into a GIF or a GIF. And you can see that because down here it's called makeagif.com. For me as a audience member, it's not ruining my enjoyment of the piece, but it's not something we offer on there. I think it's a really good suggestion though, because in a place like London where you do have data going back to 2008, there have been significant changes. In some cities, I was in Helsinki recently, it goes back to 2009, and there's been another sort of Street View in 2013, so it doesn't work as well as it would do in some places. So the answer is no, but there's a way to cheat it. Maybe there'll be a way of screen capturing. And the point on there on copyright, Street View imagery you're able to use as long as you copyright Google. If you do it in a way like here, the copyright is done for you, down at the bottom. Likewise with Google Maps, not always as clear on Google Earth because all the content on Google Earth is not owned by Google. And when you look at Google Earth, if you do look at it, there'll be clear guidance on what you can see. So, just to make the point as well, we looked at some breaking stories or a skyscraper going up. It could be though just your local street, or it could be an area that you know there's been some change. Once you've got a 360-degree photograph, let's say you've got one yourself, what more can you do with it? This is the Washington Post. They went to New York Fashion Week and took with their phone a 360-degree view. Because by the way, going back to Moore, Oklahoma, that image that the New York Times took with an expensive camera, 4 years on, can now be done on your phone. Google have an app called the Street View app, but iOS and others, Apple and other providers have their own versions, Photosphere, whatever you want to call it. On your device, you can now record your own 360 image. This is the Washington Post going to New York Fashion Week and recording their own 360-degree still. Then using a tool called Storyspheres.com, they've added their own level of audio, their own editorial to this image. Storyspheres.com is something that came out of Google Australia and a creative team there as well. This sits as an embed on your website and gives people on their phone or on their desktop a way to engage in the story in a different way. Let's click on it and see what happens. So it's loading. And we're now in New York. So with my phone or my mouse, I'm now, hopefully you can see the skyline of Manhattan. And the sound is directional, so let me look down there and see the press. Let's look behind the poor people who don't have tickets. Let's ignore them, they didn't get in. You'll notice as well there are some music icons. Let's click on one of these over here, the pink one on the top right.
And I was also struck by the sort of hushed mood of the public and also the really interesting sort of poetic gestures of the performers.
So the reporter has gone and taken a 360-degree still on their phone. Then they've gone and recorded 3 or 4 or maybe one interview on their phone. And then using Storyspheres.com, which is free, they've uploaded the still and then chosen where to implant the audio. It's a really, from my point of view, neat way to get into this kind of immersive storytelling, but by dipping your toes in. If you don't have thousands to spend on kit, this is one way to think about it in a quite unique way that does involve people in the story. different examples on the Storyspheres.com website. These, though, by the way, are all from the Washington Post. More from inside the fashion show, looking around at what we can see and hear. I've also seen these tied together. So on the Storysphere, you'll go around and listen to the interviews, and then there'll be an arrow in there. You'll click on that, and it will jump through to another Storysphere. So let's say you're doing 5 essays about 5 different people. Maybe also record a bit on your phone of them speaking and get a 360-degree photograph of them. Just ties them all together in a kind of immersive experience.
Question, okay. Storysphere.com is like an editing tool as well.
Yeah.
Is it a standalone app as well, or is it you need to work with the site?
So there is an app. The whole tool is in beta, so it's still experimental phase, but we're seeing publishers are experimenting with it. There is an app which you can download on iOS and Android. I think iOS. Someone will shout at me if it's not the case. But Storyspheres.com is the best place to start, because this is where you can start to experiment with building your own creations, and first off as well, see what others have done in terms of creating content. Dubai Fountains is an example that has no sound in it other than just a natural sound, whereas some of the other examples down here are almost like mini interviews, really. One from USA Today, and lots of independent examples as well. So take a look, download the app if you are on Android. I think there is a version on iOS, but certainly for me the first place to go is really the website. Okay. What about 360 stills more generally? Some of you might notice this, some of you might not. This is a view from the podium before one of the US election debates. On the podium, a journalist has put one of these. This is a Ricoh Theta. It's not a Google product. I'm not on commission, and this is not QVC. This is available, though, inexpensive, £300 or less. This is something that would have been placed on the podium, just like that. And then using an app, the Ricoh Theta app, the journalist walks out of shot. With one click, takes a 360-degree still of that area, or with a click held down, takes a 360-degree video of that area. This is what it looks like when it's blown out. This is what this looks like on the Mashable website, though. So Mashable are doing a piece around the election. Again, a story that we've got until November. In this case, they're looking at the view from Hillary Clinton's podium. That, there we go, is loading rather slowly on their site. And it allows me as the reader, while still remaining on the Mashable website, to take a 360-degree look around with my finger, or in this case with my mouse, just to give a different angle, just to give a different perspective on this view. I did get quite excited when I saw this, because I thought, notes. Unfortunately, empty. Imagine if they weren't, though. So, fairly simple. So, Ricoh Theta is one that I personally, not a Google recommendation, but I personally recommend. In the UK, around £300. But then there are other devices available, some more expensive than others, some that do more than others. I think at this stage in the game, when we start looking now at 360 video and virtual reality, you can spend as much as you have. This year, though, we're seeing newsrooms experimenting with this kind of technology, and we've already seen evidence that it doesn't have to cost thousands of pounds, and it doesn't have to mean weeks and weeks stuck in an edit booth. For us, one of our big bets in this space is 360 video on YouTube. So, let's go onto YouTube, and I'll show you where you can find some good examples of content that's been created from a range of different sources. youtube.com/360 brings you to a hub of videos. There are a lot of brands already experimenting with this, but I think what's been really interesting over recent weeks and months is news organisations, big, small, medium, from around the world, starting to experiment with this as well. Let's find not a horror one, no. Let's stick at the top. You're in London, so we're going to look at a fascinating piece about pigeons. And of course we'll go to an advert first. Great. In this case, this is a 360 video on YouTube. When the video plays, as it will in a moment, we'll get to see what it looks like on YouTube. Facebook have their own version of the YouTube 360 player, and there'll be others that have their own players coming out as well. Once this advert goes through on the Wall Street Journal YouTube channel, M&Ms are great, by the way. Other chocolates are available. We're now in a 360 video. So in this case, with my finger on my phone, I can literally drag the video around, or with my phone I can move the video and it moves with me. And we're seeing a 360-degree video that's been taken of pigeons in flight during some sort of art experiment. I know it's a 360 video already because if it's on YouTube, it's got this white logo in the top left that suggests it's a 360 video. And there are lots of examples of where this is quite a easy way into 360 and virtual video storytelling. We're going to go to an example that came from the UK. BBC News sent reporters, of course, to cover the events in Paris. As part of their coverage, they would have taken a device similar to this. The reporter has gone to Place de la République in Paris. This is a 1 minute 44 video that involved the reporter holding a device like this, walking around the statue and capturing a video to give you a sense of what it might have felt like to be there on the day. It's not a fully edited piece. Its narrative is fairly explanatory, but for me it does a really good job of giving you a sense of what it might be like to be there on the day. Of course, it's not going to replace long written pieces or TV packages or radio, but it's going to give audiences another way to think about this story.
This is what it's like in Paris today. This is the Place de la République. Most people are standing silent for a few minutes in front of this spontaneous memorial to the victims.
Okay. 1 minute 44 that gives you a sense of what it's like on the day there. For me, the biggest takeaway here is how quiet it is. Yes, it's not HD, and yes, it's not all bells and whistles. It's not something that's taken them weeks and weeks. It's something they've turned around quite quickly. For me, though, a great example of how VR 360 video is here, and people are experimenting with it now.
Did he record the audio of the same device, or did he use something else?
So it's a good question. Let's go back and see Matthew. As he's talking, you'll see he's not talking in this video.
This is what it's like in Paris today. This is the...
So he would have gone around and recorded the video. I think he definitely would have recorded the audio there. I haven't spoken to him whether he recorded the audio on the same device. He might have just done it on his phone. But in this case, you are getting natural sound being picked up. Would have been quite a fairly simple edit though. Visual, track, 1 minute 44. For me, a good example. There are other examples which I won't play. I'll definitely tweet this one out. This is, let me just play it actually. This is from AP. So this is the other example, the other side of things, which I think is equally strong. They sent journalists to Calais. So the sound is directional, and we're encouraged to look behind us and see our interviewee stood next to the roadside. There are fades in here. They've used graphics and, in a moment, soundtrack. But we're given a fair idea of where to look as the member of, as the audience. They've made it, for someone who's experiencing VR for the first time, something we can understand.
I have never seen them for a year and 3 months. This 1 year and 3 months I have never seen them. And I'm not sure that I'm going to see them back again or not. So it's really, really difficult. My future is like, I'm going to stay in France. My decision is to stay in France. I'm going to seek asylum here in France.
Okay, 5.5 minutes long. Really encourage you to take a look at that. It's a really considered piece of journalism that happens to use VR. And from my personal point of view, that's the right way around. Story first, then the technology to tell it in a different way. What? Yeah?
How would they have edited that? And does YouTube plan to allow you to do that kind of edits on your platform?
So the question was about editing. So in that case, it would have depended what device they took. So they could have taken an 8-lens device. That means you've got to literally stitch 8 videos together. It takes a long time. It can go wrong quite easily because if you don't get the join right, then it kind of offsets the entire video. It would have been something that they would have edited on their own edit suites, then uploaded onto the YouTube site. You'll know if you're someone that uses mobile journalism techniques that youtube.com/editor is a useful way to build quite a simple package of your own YouTube recordings. That doesn't go down the extent of 360 yet, but given that we are making efforts to try and host YouTube 360, I think that's something that we definitely would be looking at. Going one step further on, we're also seeing news organisations using computer-generated imagery. This is from The Guardian. It's 6x9. They interviewed 8 inmates of US prisons who'd been in solitary confinement, and using a tool called Unity, they built a cell. It's a 9-minute video. It's quite dark. It's, for me, a really excellent piece of journalism that I'd encourage you to take a look at. It's on the Guardian.com website. Just put 6x9 in and you'll find it. I do want to play you the trailer though, because I think it does a good job of showing you what you might experience.
Welcome to your cell. You're going to be here for 23 hours a day.
You are going to undergo many different kinds of reactions, and some of them will be more immediate than others.
Keep your eye on survival.
Memorize your space. After a while, things start to slip.
I find myself floating.
And hold it, it trips.
People turn on themselves.
It's almost like you want to feel alive.
You do something to make them notice you.
So, now that you're here, what are you going to do? What can you do?
6x9, a virtual experience of solitary confinement.
So well worth a look. Whether you watch that on Android via the Google Play Store, they have a Guardian VR app, or by the Apple Store, there's also an app, or if you watch it, a shortened version on the YouTube 360 video. Time is up, so I am going to play you one last video to lighten the mood and also show you what might be next. Google Tilt Brush is a tool that we announced a couple of weeks back. It's something that is a developer tool, but shows you what might be coming when you think about the future of VR and storytelling. What about giving people the option to create their own unique environments, or to create environments that replicate something they've seen or experienced? Take a look at this quick video from Tiltbrush. Okay, so from beginner to expert, this is the year that newsrooms are starting to experiment with virtual reality and 360 storytelling. I'm glad we took some questions as we went along because time is up, sorry. I can't have any more questions now, but if you do have questions we've not got to today, newslabsupport@google.com is the best email to get in touch. If you are here and you're on behalf of an academic university, or you're here on behalf of a newsroom and you want to have an idea about the training we offer to journalists, newslabsupport@google.com. If you have any ideas about how trends could be useful for your news gathering or reporting, same email. The mailing list at the bottom, g.co/Google Media Alerts. I think though my main takeaway is the website, g.co/newslab. I hope you've enjoyed the session and the day so far, and you're staying around for some amazing panels straight afterwards. Thank you very much, and we're going to hand over now to find out what is next. Thanks.